We learned from Adam Smith that if people specialize on that what they can do best, that drives the wealth of nations, right? Specialization drives the wealth of nations. That's what we learned by the end of the 18th century. David Ricardo got one step further and highlighted the idea of comparative advantages, which is a little bit more difficult. And the best number example I found in the literature, I found here Samuelson Nordhaus, which is a really nice textbook. 2010 was the latest edition. Nevertheless, it's a well-established textbook. 19th editions were published. So Samuelson Nordhaus, chapter 18, if you want to read that, I simplified the example a little bit, but here you can find the idea of comparative advantage. And the idea is, if one country is better in both activities, so if one country is better with respect to productivity in producing both goods, and in this case, food and clothing, and you could, of course, extend that to other goods. So if one country is better in both activities, right, that's the main idea, then even in such a case, it's better to trade. It's better to exchange. Then all countries are better off. That's the core idea. Let's take that number example for a second. So 1 unit of food is either produced in the US or in Europe. And here we find the labor hours, so hours worked for that unit of food. So in the US you need just 1 hour. In Europe you need 3 hours. So the US is more productive than Europe in producing 1 unit of food. Okay, that's just a number example. And clothing, the US 2 hours for 1 unit of clothing, and in Europe 4 hours for 1 unit of clothing. So the US is also better in producing clothing, and so the US is better in producing clothing and food. And nevertheless, both countries, or continent and countries, could be better off by exchanging if one country specializes according to the comparative advantages. And that means here, with respect to food, the US are 3 times as productive as Europe, right? Because they only need 1 hour for 1 unit, whereas Europe needs 3 hours. And here, the US is twice as productive as Europe, because Europe needs 4 hours and the US only half, right? So it's US are twice as productive as Europe. And comparative advantage tells us that the US should specialize on that where they are relatively more productive than the others, and that's they should specialize on food production in that simple example, and Europe should specialize on clothing, and then they start trading, and if they start trading, if they exchange their goods, then both countries end up with more wealth, because overall they have a bigger cake to distribute, right? And that's the main insight coming from comparative advantage. And in the second step, I would like to use another example to show it with respect to international trade.